This video is about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And what you're looking at is the chemical formula for photosynthesis, that's on top, and the chemical formula for cellular respiration on the bottom. Take a moment to think about what the relationship might be between these two cellular processes, between these two chemical reactions. I know if you haven't seen these before, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you first look at it. Let me point one thing out. Photosynthesis, first off, look at the arrows. So over here, we have the chemicals going into this reaction. This arrow is telling us that over here, we have the things produced in the reaction. And I highlighted the sugar. Notice that the sugar also shows up down here. And so does the oxygen. And you can probably pick up on some other relationships between these two reactions. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are all about a basic biological function that we call metabolism. So all living things need food, and they use the energy in food to carry out life processes, and they also use the materials in food for growth and repair. And this process of using the energy and materials in food is called metabolism. That's what metabolism is. It's eating food and taking the energy and materials out of that food and using it in our bodies. And so we could also say we metabolize food. Metabolism and metabolize, these are related words. When we talk about metabolism, we have to talk about producers and consumers. Another way of saying that is we have to talk about autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs make their own food. The image on the top right is of a plant. Inside some of the cells of plants, there are chloroplasts, and chloroplasts make food for the plant. And the plant then metabolizes that food. It draws its energy from the food, and it uses the materials in that food for growth and repair. Heterotrophs can't do that. Heterotrophs cannot make their own food. Heterotrophs have to eat autotrophs or other heterotrophs. Down on the bottom right, there's a woman sitting down to supper or lunch. She's eating a meal. And this seems like a silly thought, but note that you've never seen a plant do that. Plants don't farm, they don't hunt prey, they don't sit down to dinner. And that's such an obvious point, but it's worth noting because it'll help you remember that plants don't have to do any of that. They make their own food inside their bodies. They don't have mouths, they don't have digestive systems. Really, within the cells of the plant, they can produce their own food. And so that's why you never see a plant do any of the things that we associate with eating. Autotrophs are also called producers, and that's because they produce food for themselves, they can make food, and they also produce that food for other organisms, because other organisms are going to eat the autotrophs. Heterotrophs are also called consumers. They can't produce food, they have to consume other organisms for their food. In another way that this is often phrased is it said, heterotrophs obtain food from their environment. To obtain is to get. So heterotrophs get their food from their environment. They can't get their food from inside themselves. They can't just make their own food the way autotrophs can. I want to make a distinction between making food and preparing food. Autotrophs take things that are not food and turn those things into food. Heterotrophs can't do that, and humans are heterotrophs, so humans can't make food. Now, in everyday speech, we often talk about making food. And I'm not telling you not to do this, but I think this is a point of confusion because in biology class, we're not going to be, when we say make food, we mean take things that aren't food and turn them into food. We're using the word a little differently than we do in everyday speech. We might say that I made supper this morning, or my parents made supper last night. In those instances, what we're really talking about is preparing food. Humans can take things that are already food and turn them into something that's enjoyable to eat. They can prepare food. This woman on the right, she's eating a pizza. The person who prepared that pizza did not turn the wheat into food. They didn't turn the tomatoes into food. They didn't turn the dairy products into food. They didn't turn the cheese into food. All of those things were already food. They just changed their form into something that's tastier. So that's the distinction between making food and preparing food. In biology class, when we say making food, we're really talking about taking things that aren't food and turning them into food. The most important process used by autotrophs is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis uses the energy of the sun to make food. In this image, we can see we have a forest, so all these plants in the forest, and we see the sun coming through. Those plants are using the energy in the sun to make food. All plants engage in photosynthesis. That's one of the defining features of plants. They engage in photosynthesis, and they use photosynthesis to make food. And plants make food for themselves, but they also make food for all of the heterotrophs. That's why we call plants producers. They make food, whereas we call the heterotrophs consumers. We're going to eat plants, or we're going to eat animals that ate plants, or animals that ate plants. We could go all the way down the food chain, but the point is that at the bottom of that food chain, we're going to have some autotrophs. And they're probably going to be plants. Photosynthesis is a process. So what's a process? A process is a development that takes place in steps. For example, buying a car is a process. And it's a process that includes shopping around, test driving cars, applying for car loans. We could probably add more steps. But the point is that when you buy a car, it's not something that's done like that. It's something that takes place in steps. And photosynthesis is like that. That's why we say it's a process. Photosynthesis is also a chemical reaction. And a chemical reaction is just when chemicals interact with each other. And in a chemical reaction, you have reactants and you have products. The reactants in a chemical reaction are the chemicals that go into the chemical reaction. Down on the bottom, we have our chemical formula for photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide and the water, those are our reactants. Those are the chemicals going into the chemical reaction. Chemical reactions also have products. The products are the chemicals that are made in the chemical reaction. In photosynthesis, the products are sugar, and specifically the sugar glucose. The products are sugar and oxygen. And by the way, oxygen is actually a byproduct of photosynthesis. A byproduct is a product of a chemical reaction that is not the point of the reaction. The point of photosynthesis is to produce glucose, but it also produces oxygen as a byproduct. So photosynthesis is the process of using the energy of sunlight to turn carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. If we look down at the bottom, we see, let's highlight our arrow first. So the things over here, these are our reactants, and the things over here are our products. You can see where it says light over here. That's where the plant is using the energy of the sunlight to power this chemical reaction. But here are our reactants, carbon dioxide and water. And over here are our products, sugar and oxygen. So again, photosynthesis is the process of using the energy of sunlight to turn carbon dioxide and water into glucose, that's our sugar, and oxygen. Again, the reactants of photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and water. The products of photosynthesis are glucose and oxygen. Glucose is our sugar. And photosynthesis is fueled by sunlight. Photosynthesis takes place in chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are organelles found in plants. They're found in some other organisms too, but they're found in all plants. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is the molecule that absorbs the energy of the sun. So chlorophyll is the molecule that's in chloroplasts that makes photosynthesis possible. Down on the bottom right, we have an image of a plant cell. And we know it's a plant cell for a few reasons. One is it has a nucleus. So we know that plant cells have a nucleus. Plant cells have mitochondria. They have central vacuoles. and they have cell walls, and they also have chloroplasts. And you have to recognize, as we said, you have to recognize that that's a chloroplast. So it's the combination of all those things that leads us to recognize that this is a plant cell. Up above that, we have an image of a chloroplast. Now, inside that chloroplast, we have the molecule chlorophyll, and that's what's absorbing the sunlight. So up here we have our sunlight that's going to power the chemical process of photosynthesis. And notice that we also have our carbon dioxide, CO2 stands for carbon dioxide, and H2O, stands for water. So we have carbon dioxide and water, our reactants, and we have our fuel, the sunlight. And we know that this process is going to produce glucose and oxygen. The purpose of photosynthesis is to produce glucose. And glucose is a carbohydrate. And plants can actually use glucose to build other types of carbohydrates as well. What's the point of all this? Why is the plant producing carbohydrates? Well, there's three reasons. Carbohydrates serve three important functions or purposes for plants. For one thing, plants can store energy in the form of starch. Starch is a carbohydrate. It's a bunch of sugars combined. It's carbohydrates such as glucose combined with each other to form a more complex carbohydrate. But the point is, plants can store energy in the form of carbohydrates. They also build cell walls out of carbohydrates. Remember, cellulose is the substance found in the cell walls of plants. Plant cell walls are made out of cellulose, and cellulose is a carbohydrate. So ultimately, that cellulose is produced in photosynthesis. And plants also use the glucose produced in photosynthesis for cellular respiration, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about. Cellular respiration is the process of breaking down glucose in the presence of oxygen. That's our textbook definition. Cellular respiration is the process of breaking down glucose in the presence of oxygen. The reactants of cellular respiration are glucose and oxygen. The sugar here is glucose. And these are our reactants, glucose and oxygen. So this, of course, is the chemical formula for cellular respiration. The products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide and water, as well as ATP. And this is actually the point of cellular respiration. The point of cellular respiration is to produce ATP. What is ATP? ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and it's ATP that cells use for energy. ATP is what cells use for energy. For instance, ATP is what powers active transport. When cells want to move something across the cell membrane and they have to use energy to move it, and we call that active transport. It's ATP that provides the energy for that. Just like photosynthesis takes place in chloroplasts, an organelle found in plants, cellular respiration takes place in mitochondria. And actually, all eukaryotic cells have mitochondria. So plant cells have mitochondria, but so do animal cells. Animal cells and plant cells carry out cellular respiration. It's easy to find the mitochondria in this plant cell. I won't highlight them all, but that's the plant cell. We can see the mitochondria. This is an animal cell. We know it's an animal cell because it has a nucleus, so we know it's eukaryotic, but it has no cell walls nor chloroplasts. And that's what gives it away as an animal cell. But here are the mitochondria. So the point, you have to be able to recognize these as mitochondria, by the way. But the point here is that plant and animal cells have mitochondria because both plant and animal cells have to carry out cellular respiration because both types of cells need ATP to power their cellular processes, to power all the things that they do. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite processes. I'll show you what I mean. They're not perfectly opposite, but they're basically opposite processes. Over here we have our sugar and our oxygen, our glucose and oxygen. Those are the products of photosynthesis. And these products of photosynthesis are the reactants of cellular respiration. And we can also see that the products of cellular respiration are among the reactants in photosynthesis. So remember that these processes are related. They're almost exact opposites of each other. Plants carry out photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Animals just carry out cellular respiration. And it's actually even more important for animals because animals do a lot more moving around than plants do. Plants can't move, certainly not in the way that animals can. Animals move around. And so animals need a lot of ATP. So animals carry out a lot of cellular respiration, which means they need a lot of oxygen. So in this image up here on the right, this is an image from the MCAS, and it's one of the ways that the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration can be illustrated. You need to be able to look at an image like this and understand what it's referring to. The W refers to photosynthesis. The plant is carrying out photosynthesis. And in one of the products of photosynthesis is oxygen, a gas that is released into the air by the plant after it carries out photosynthesis. Well, animals breathe in oxygen. So this deer is going to breathe in the oxygen. It's going to use that oxygen for cellular respiration. That's what the Y represents. Well, one of the products of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide. And so that's what the Z represents. The Z represents the carbon dioxide that the animal breathes out. And as you can see, the plant will then take that carbon dioxide in, it'll use it in photosynthesis, and then it'll breathe out, it'll release the oxygen into the atmosphere again, where animals can use it, and they'll use it to carry out cellular respiration. And you can see this is a cycle that illustrates the relationship between these two cellular processes. When we talk about cellular respiration, we're going to be talking about cellular respiration that involves oxygen. But there are other types of cellular respiration. Aerobic means involving oxygen, and anaerobic means not involving oxygen. The AN here means not, so not aerobic. Aerobic cellular respiration is cellular respiration in the presence of oxygen. That's what we've been talking about. But there is anaerobic cellular respiration as well. And anaerobic cellular respiration is cellular respiration when oxygen is not present. Is one type of cellular respiration better than another? Sort of, because aerobic cellular respiration produces way more ATP than anaerobic cellular respiration. And so if a cell can perform aerobic cellular respiration, if it has access to oxygen, it'll use aerobic cellular respiration over anaerobic, or in addition to it. Let's take a look at some MCAS questions. Some types of bacteria are able to perform photosynthesis. These bacteria must therefore contain which of the following in their membranes? A, chlorophyll, B, glucose, C, mitochondria, D, ribosomes. The answer is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the molecule that absorbs the energy of sunlight and that gets the process of photosynthesis going. In plants, the chlorophyll is found in chloroplasts, an organelle that plants have that carries out photosynthesis. Which of the following substances is used by plants as a reactant in photosynthesis? Remember, reactants are chemicals that go into a chemical reaction. A, carbon dioxide, B, glucose, C, oxygen, D, pyruvic acid. Well, the answer is A, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is one of the reactants in photosynthesis. Algae, mosses, ferns, lichens, and seed plants all use which of the following processes to acquire food? A, cellular respiration, B, decomposition, C, photosynthesis, or D, predation? Let's focus on just one word, plants. How do plants get food? They produce their own food through photosynthesis. So the answer is C. An English doctor is given credit for developing the modern terrarium in the 1800s. The doctor kept some plants in a sealed jar containing soil and air. That's all that's meant by a terrarium here. We have a terrarium in the sense that we have a sealed glass container. The plants survived in the sealed jar for 4 years. And the question is going to be, how did the plants survive in this sealed environment? What two processes allowed the plants to cycle nutrients and survive in the sealed jar? The answer is photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Think about what would happen if an animal was kept in a sealed jar. Of course, it wouldn't survive. And one of the reasons, the reason a plant survives where an animal wouldn't, is that the plant is going to engage in these opposite chemical processes. And it can use the products of photosynthesis to power cellular respiration. It can use the products of photosynthesis as the reactants of cellular respiration, and vice versa. So the plant can survive in a sealed jar because of this. But the point here is you have to understand that those processes, for one thing, are essential to survival for a plant, but also that they're related in the sense that the products and reactants are cycled through each. In cells, aerobic respiration, cellular respiration in the presence of oxygen, is more efficient than anaerobic respiration, cellular respiration in the absence of oxygen. This is because aerobic respiration produces more of which of the following substances? A, ATP, B, DNA, C, glucose, or D, protein? And the answer is A. The point of cellular respiration is to produce ATP, and aerobic respiration, which uses oxygen, is going to produce more ATP than anaerobic respiration, which doesn't use oxygen. So the answer is A. The products of photosynthesis are carbohydrates and oxygen. Which process uses these substances as reactants? A, cellular respiration, B, fertilization, C, mechanical digestion, or D, translation? Well, you know that the answer is A. The reactants of cellular respiration are the products of photosynthesis. So what's produced in photosynthesis is used in the process of cellular respiration, and vice versa. In this lesson, we talked about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis takes place in chloroplasts, an organelle found in plants. Cellular respiration takes place in mitochondria, an organelle found in plants and animals. Chlorophyll is the molecule in chloroplasts that actually absorbs the energy of the sun. So chlorophyll is what makes photosynthesis possible. We talked about reactants and products. Reactants are the chemicals that go into a chemical reaction, whereas the products are the chemicals that come out of it that are produced in the reaction. We saw that the point of photosynthesis is to produce glucose, and the point of cellular respiration is to produce ATP.